At 89, Sigrid Alvarsen sat at her son Marc's kitchen table, while 3 brochures for Stonewell Pines Senior Living were slid across the wood like cards in a game she had not agreed to play. The room they had chosen for her faced a service drive. The bed was made up in a hospital green. Her children spoke about the house on Hawthorn Glen Drive the way people speak about a car they are about to sell, already arguing about who would handle the listing. What Sigrid did next was something none of them had prepared for. She told them she would think about it. The drive home took 12 minutes. Then she opened her late husband's old filing cabinet, found a deed for 60 acres of forest in Upper Michigan that none of her children remembered existed, and 4 days later she packed the truck and went north. The note she left under the salt shaker said only, "Gone north to finish something your father started. The roses need water on Tuesdays." 8 months later, when Marc finally tracked her down past the small lumber town of Kettle Ridge, the porch of a hand-built cabin held a woman he barely recognized. She had built the porch herself. What was rising on the land behind it would force every member of his family to reconsider what an old woman is, and what 89 years of attention to the natural world can produce when nobody is left telling you to stop. This is Sigrid's story, and it begins on a Saturday afternoon in October, in a kitchen that was not her own, with 3 brochures and a green wing she was never going to live in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house on Hawthorn Glen Drive had been Sigrid's home for 41 years. She had moved in at 48 with Otto in a U-Haul packed, mostly with botanical reference books, and the expectation that this would be the last house she ever bought. Otto had died 9 years before that October Saturday, which meant Sigrid had lived alone for 9 years, and her 3 adult children had been using that fact like a crowbar for at least the last 2 of them. The pressure had a starting point she could place precisely. Marc had said on a Sunday in October 2 years earlier that a house this size was a lot of square footage to keep heated through a New Jersey winter. He had said it with the gentle voice he used when he wanted her to think his suggestion was her own idea. Sigrid had filed the comment and watched what grew out of it. What grew was a series of conversations that all moved in the same direction without ever announcing where they were going. Marc would mention a friend whose mother had fallen and broken a hip in her own bathroom. Phoebe forwarded an article about social isolation in older adults, then another about cognitive decline, then another about adult children who waited too long. Soren, the youngest, said nothing during these conversations and looked at the floor in a way that told his mother he disagreed and was not going to say so. She had been managing fine. The tomatoes came in every August. She drove herself to her doctor and to the supermarket and to the small studio she rented downtown, where she still illustrated botanical specimens for a natural history press in Vermont, who paid her per plate and had used her work in 3 books that year. She paid her own bills. She read the morning paper at the kitchen table with the focused attention she had brought to text since 1953. The pressure was not actually about her competence. It was about Marc's investment firm, which had taken a serious beating in the last cycle. It was about Phoebe's overextended portfolio of rental properties in 3 states. It was about the simple fact that the house on Hawthorn Glen Drive, if sold, would solve problems none of them were willing to name out loud. Sigrid had decided 2 years ago not to name them either. Naming them would only force her children to defend the part of themselves that was using her, and that defense would make the conversation uglier than it needed to be. Better to let the campaign continue at its own pace and watch it carefully. The family meeting in October was different. The family meeting had brochures. Marc held it at his house on the 2nd Saturday of the month. Phoebe came with her husband Trevor. Soren came alone, which Sigrid noted. Marc's wife Madeline had set out coffee and a plate of supermarket cookies that nobody touched, and Marc had a laptop open on the dining room table angled so his mother could see the screen. The screen showed Stonewell Pines Senior Living, a facility 40 minutes outside Marlton Heights, and a photograph of a room on the 2nd floor that Marc described as the warmer wing. The warmer wing faced a service drive. The window in the photograph looked at a dumpster enclosure. The carpet was the green of an aquarium nobody had cleaned in a while. $5,000 a month, Marc said. He said, the number the way people say numbers they hope will be absorbed before they are examined. It includes meals, a nurse on call, group activities. You wouldn't have to think about anything. Bingo on Tuesdays, Phoebe added. Sigrid looked at her daughter. Phoebe looked at her coffee. Soren cleared his throat and did not speak. Sigrid took her time with the brochure. $5,000 a month was $60,000 a year, more than she had spent on anything in any single year of her life, including the kitchen renovation in 1991 that Otto had complained about for 6 months. The carpet looked dirty even in the photograph. None of her 3 children, sitting in the room with her, had asked a single question about what she actually wanted. I'll think about it, she said. Marc said they would need an answer by Friday. Sigrid said she understood. She picked up her purse, said goodbye to Madeline, kissed Soren on the cheek, and drove herself home. It was Saturday afternoon. She had 6 days, and that was more than she needed. The drive back to Hawthorn Glen Drive took 12 minutes through the kind of October light that turned the maple trees on Roosevelt Avenue into something staged. Sigrid did not turn on the radio. The brochure stayed folded in her purse on the passenger seat. She was not planning anything yet. She was sorting. The house was warm when she got home. She put the kettle on, stood at the kitchen window, watching a Junko work the feeder, and considered what she had just been offered. She had been a botanical illustrator since 1969. The career started with small ink drawings of native wildflowers sold to a regional press in Pennsylvania for $12 a plate, and it grew into something her family never quite registered as work because the income was modest and the hours were her own. Her plates appeared in field guides used by every park ranger in 3 states. 3 universities held her drawings in teaching collections. The Smithsonian had purchased a series of her sedges in 2011. None of her children had asked to see her studio. Otto had built her studio. 6 weekends in the summer of 1986, he had converted the back half of the garage into a north-lit workspace with a high stool, a flat file cabinet for the original plates, and a small wood stove for cold months. He had been a soil scientist for the State Forestry Service, and he understood that what she did with her drawings and what he did with his core samples were the same kind of attention applied to the same world. They had been married 41 years when a heart attack took him in his sleep in November of 2017. After Otto, Sigrid kept the studio warm and the garden in working order. She joined a bird-watching group that met every other Saturday at Peck West Wildlife Management Area. She kept the standing Wednesday call with her oldest friend, Cordelia Hartwell in Asheville, who had been her roommate at Drew University in 1957 and who still knew Sigrid better than anyone alive. The children noticed none of this. The children noticed the empty rooms. Marc started the campaign early. He had a financial planner's vocabulary for what was happening to his own balance sheet, which had taken a beating in 2022 and another in 2023, and he had begun looking at his mother's house the way a contractor looks at a salvage yard. The conversations were small at first. A mention of property taxes, a forwarded article about reverse mortgages, a question dropped at Sunday lunch about whether she had ever thought about downsizing. Phoebe came in next with a different pattern. Phoebe owned 3 rental properties in 3 states, all carrying more debt than was comfortable, and her concern arrived as articles. Articles about cognitive decline, about social isolation, about the specific dangers of living alone past 80. They appeared in Sigrid's email roughly once a week with subject lines like "Thought of you" and "Interesting read." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Soren was the complication. He taught music at a small college in eastern Pennsylvania, 58 years old, married to a woman named Dahlia, whom Sigrid liked very much. He had what she privately thought of as the gift of seeing what was happening without quite being able to make himself stop it. He came to Hawthorn Glen Drive every other month, helped with whatever needed doing, stayed for dinner, and never once mentioned Stonewell Pines or any other facility. He also never said a word in the family group text where his siblings traded talking points, and his silence was costing him something. Sigrid knew it. She let him carry it, because forcing him to speak would have made it worse. She had figured out the actual problem early in the campaign. The actual problem was money. Marc's firm was bleeding clients. Phoebe had 2 of her 3 rentals listed and not selling. The Hawthorn Glen house, in the current market, would clear well over $600,000 after the mortgage was paid off. Marc and Phoebe had clearly already worked out what that figure meant if it could be moved into a Stonewell Pines arrangement and the difference distributed between them. None of this had been said to her directly. They had used the word safety a great deal. They had used peace of mind and just in case and the next stage and what makes the most sense at your age. The vocabulary of the campaign had been carefully scrubbed of anything that could be quoted back at them in a courtroom or at a holiday dinner. Sigrid sat at her own kitchen table now, the one Otto had refinished in 1989. She put the Stonewell Pines brochure flat on the wood and looked at it. She studied the aquarium green carpet, the window facing the service drive, the bingo schedule, the $5,000 a month. She poured a second cup of tea. The feeling sitting in her chest was not fear. She had expected fear because she had read enough about elder displacement to know what fear looked like in this situation. What she felt was closer to the focused interest she brought to the start of a difficult botanical commission. A complicated specimen, a problem that wanted her full attention. She got up and walked to the small back room where Otto had kept his filing cabinet. The lower drawer had not been opened in 9 years. There was something in it she needed to find. The filing cabinet was Otto's olive green 4-drawer steel case from 1972, and it had not been opened since the week after his funeral, when Sigrid had pulled the will and the life insurance papers and shut everything else away because she had not been ready to read his handwriting on his own labels. She opened the bottom drawer first. Otto had organized his files the way he organized everything, which was alphabetically and with a soil scientist's distrust of ambiguity. The hanging folders were labeled in his small, precise capitals. Auto, bank, cabin, contracts. Sigrid pulled the cabin folder. Inside was a property deed dated April 14th, 1968, recorded with Gogebic County, Michigan, transferring 60 acres of timber and bogland from the estate of Halvor Alvarsen to his son Otto Alvarsen for the sum of $1 and other considerations. There were 2 USGS topographic maps with hand-marked boundaries, a 1971 letter from a county forester noting the presence of a remnant white pine stand in the southwest quarter, and a small black and white photograph of a log structure with a stovepipe at the back, taken before Sigrid had ever met Otto. The land was called Clover Fern Hollow. Otto had told her about it once, in the second year of their marriage, in the casual tone of a man describing something he assumed he would eventually take her to see. His grandfather had homesteaded the parcel in 1903. His father had hunted it. Otto had spent 6 summers there as a boy, learning to read the woods from a man who never wrote anything down. The cabin in the photograph had been built in 1947 by Otto's uncle and an unnamed carpenter from a nearest town. They had never gone together. Life on Hawthorn Glen Drive had absorbed every summer with children and gardens and Otto's research projects. And the land had become a thing they would visit sometime, the way many couples have a sometime that never converts into Tuesday. Sigrid sat on the floor of the back room with the deed across her lap and felt something in her chest that was not grief. The grief had its own location, lower and quieter, and she knew that one. This was something else. This was a fact she had not held in her hands for many years, suddenly being a fact again. She got up. She took the deed and the maps and the photograph to the kitchen table, set them down next to the Stonewell Pines brochure, and started doing arithmetic. Stonewell Pines was $60,000 a year for a room facing a dumpster. Property taxes on Clover Fern Hollow, paid through an automatic draft from a small account Otto had set up in 1968, came to $412 annually. The ledger sheet was in the folder. She found 9 years of canceled checks behind it. The most recent one from March, drawn on a Bank of America account she had assumed was closed. The Hawthorn Glen house, rented furnished in the current market, would bring between $3,200 and $3,800 a month. She knew this because she had a friend 2 blocks over whose son had rented out his colonial after his divorce, and Susan had been free with the numbers. A small homestead operation on already owned land, with no mortgage, no facility fee, and no service drive view, would cost a fraction of Stonewell Pines and produce something Stonewell Pines could not. It would produce a return to a place. It would produce Possibly the completion of a plan Otto had carried in his pocket for 56 years and never gotten to finish. She wrote the numbers out on a yellow legal pad. Income from the rental, plus her Social Security, plus Otto's pension, plus what she still earned from the Vermont press, came to roughly $4,700 a month. The cost of restoring a small cabin and living in it modestly, even with the long Michigan winters and the propane and the weekly drive to Kettle Ridge for groceries, would not approach $3,500. The arithmetic produced a surplus. She set down the pen. She looked at the photograph of the cabin, which was small and crooked and had a stovepipe leaning slightly to the left, and she felt something open in her that she had not felt sit fully in her body since 2017. Then she picked up the phone and called Asheville. Cordelia Hartwell answered on the third ring with the dry voice of a woman who had been expecting the call for 2 years. Tell me they pulled out the brochures. 3 of them, Sigrid said. Marc has a laptop now. Of course he does. What's the room? Service drive view. Aquarium green carpet. Cordelia laughed, the laugh Sigrid had been listening to since 1957, the one that started low and built. Sweetheart, what are you going to do? Sigrid told her about the deed. She told her about Sigrid Alvarsen and the white pine stand and the cabin in the photograph and the $412 tax bill that had been quietly auto-drafting from a 1968 bank account for 9 years without anyone noticing. She told her about the arithmetic. Cordelia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Otto would lose his mind. In the good way. I think so, Sigrid said. How long do you have? They want an answer Friday. Then you have until Friday to make it look like an answer, Cordelia said. After that you do whatever you actually want to do, and you don't tell them until it's already true. Sigrid wrote that sentence down on the legal pad under the arithmetic. She underlined it twice. She had 4 working days. She was going to use every one of them. Monday morning, Sigrid sat at the kitchen table with a fresh legal pad and made a list. She had run a household and a freelance practice for 60 years, and lists were the architecture of how she got things done. The list had 11 items. Each had a deadline. She did not call Marc. She did not call Phoebe. The campaign had taught her that engaging on their terms produced nothing useful, and she was done engaging on their terms. She was going to operate quietly, on her own clock, and present them with a completed fact instead of an argument they could try to dismantle. The first call went to a property management firm in West Orange, recommended by Susan 2 blocks over. A woman named Rita Nakamura answered, asked 4 questions, and had a leasing agent at the door by Tuesday afternoon. Rita walked the house, photographed the rooms, and gave Sigrid a written estimate of $3,500 a month for a furnished 12-month lease. Sigrid signed the management agreement Wednesday morning. The second call went to Dr. Priya Bhattacharya. Sigrid had been her patient for 16 years, and Priya was the kind of physician who answered her own messages within an hour. Sigrid told her she was going to spend the winter and possibly longer at a remote property in Upper Michigan. Priya did not ask why. She asked what the nearest hospital was, what the elevation was, what the road conditions were like in March. She arranged for a 3-month supply of every prescription, a pulse oximeter, a portable blood pressure cuff that synced to a phone app, and a telehealth schedule of every 6 weeks. The whole conversation took 11 minutes. The third call went to a lawyer Sigrid found through the New Jersey Bar Association referral line. Esperanza Quintanilla had her own small practice in Montclair, no connection to the firm Marc used, and she was available Friday at 10. Sigrid booked the appointment and faxed her the rental agreement and the Clover Fern deed in advance. Tuesday afternoon, she drove to a storage facility in Bloomfield and rented a climate-controlled unit. Wednesday afternoon, after the leasing agent left, she walked the house room by room with a roll of blue painter's tape and marked what would go to storage, what would stay for the renters, and what would come north with her. What came north was small. Otto's field journals, all 11 of them, in a waxed canvas tote. Her own working sketchbooks from the last 40 years. The flat file with her unpublished plates. A box of watercolor pans, brushes, drafting pens, pencils. The good cast iron from the kitchen. 2 sets of warm clothes. Her grandmother's wool blanket. A copy of Petey's Natural History of Trees of Eastern and Central North America, which Otto had given her for her 40th birthday, with an inscription she did not need to reread before packing. The storage unit took the family photographs, the wedding china, Otto's tools, the desk from the back room, and the filing cabinet itself, which she had emptied of everything she needed and could not bring herself to leave behind in an empty house. Thursday, she had the truck serviced. It was a 2014 Ford F-150 that Otto had bought used in 2016, and she had kept up the maintenance because Otto had taught her the maintenance schedule and she had not seen any reason to stop. The mechanic at Marlton Auto, a man named Dwayne who had known Otto, asked where she was going. She said Michigan. He said, "How far into Michigan?" She said far. He changed the oil, rotated the tires, checked the brakes, replaced the serpentine belt, and did not charge her for the belt. Friday morning, Esperanza, Quintanilla, read every document Sigrid put in front of her and made 2 small adjustments to the rental agreement. She also reviewed the clover fern deed, confirmed it was clean, and gave Sigrid the name of a real estate attorney in Ironwood, Michigan, in case anything required local expertise. "Your son is not on any of these documents," Esperanza said. "No," Sigrid said. "Good," Esperanza said. Friday afternoon, Sigrid called Marc. "I've thought about it," she said. She heard the small intake of breath on his end, the quality of a man who had been expecting capitulation and was already calculating what came after. "I'm not signing the Stonewell Pines papers," she said. "I've made other arrangements. The house is being rented through a management company starting November 1st. I'll be away for the winter, possibly longer. I've left the management company as your point of contact for anything administrative. I love you, Marc. Take care of Madeline." She hung up before he could organize a response. The phone rang again within 90 seconds. She let it go to voicemail. It rang 7 more times that afternoon. She did not answer any of them. Saturday, she walked through the garden with her neighbor Margaret Lynn and went over the watering schedule and where the keys would be. Margaret asked no unnecessary questions and accepted the spare key with the same matter-of-factness she had brought to looking after the house during Sigrid's previous trips. Saturday afternoon, Sigrid placed a folded note on the kitchen table under the salt shaker. "Marc, Phoebe Soren, gone north to finish something your father started. The rental income will route through the management company. Margaret has the keys and instructions for the roses. I am well. I love you all very much, which is why I am handling this myself. Mom, P.S. Soren, the field journals are with me. We will talk in the spring." Sunday morning at 5:15, she loaded the last of the canvas totes into the truck, took one slow look at the studio Otto had built her in 1986, locked the door, and drove west on I-78 toward Pennsylvania. Cloverfern Hollow was 1,100 miles away. She gave herself 3 days. The first day, she made it to a small motel outside Toledo. The second day, she crossed Michigan on US 23 and slept in a Best Western in Cadillac. The third day, she turned northwest at Marquette and watched the country change. Sigrid had not driven across her own country in 26 years. The last time had been with Otto in 1999, a 10-day loop through the Smokies and back, and she had forgotten what the long, flat highways did to a person's interior. The radio drifted in and out of stations playing music she did not recognize. The sky over Wisconsin and back into upper Michigan was the kind of October sky that had nothing to prove. She stopped twice for gas, and once at a diner outside Crystal Falls where she ate a grilled cheese and drank coffee that was hot and bad and exactly what she wanted. The waitress called her honey and asked if she was visiting family. Sigrid said she was visiting land. The waitress looked at her for a second longer than was strictly necessary and refilled her cup without comment. Kettle Ridge appeared on the third afternoon. The town was smaller than she had pictured from the satellite images. 4 blocks of brick storefronts on a single main street with a hardware store, a grocery, a Lutheran church, a feed and seed, and a small diner called the Red Pine. The county road that led to Cloverfern Hollow turned off 2 miles past the town limits and ran west through second-growth maple and birch for another 7 miles before the pavement gave out. The last mile was gravel, and the last quarter mile was a 2-track that wound between leaning hemlocks and crossed a small creek over a culvert that looked older than she was. The truck handled it. The light through the canopy turned the dust gold. She stopped the truck where the 2-track ended and got out. The cabin was still standing. That was the first surprise. The The second was that the photograph in Otto's folder had not prepared her for the scale of the place. The clearing was larger than she had pictured. The cabin sat at the south end, a single-story log structure roughly 20 by 30 feet, with the leaning stovepipe she remembered from the photograph and a roof that had clearly been patched at least once, but was holding. The west wall had moss on the lower logs. The window glass was intact in 3 of the 4 windows. The 4th had been boarded over with a piece of plywood that had been there long enough for the lichen to colonize it. Behind the cabin, the land rose in a long slope toward a stand of trees that, even from a distance, had the particular bearing of old white pine. The remnant stand, the one the 1971 letter had described. Sigrid stood in the clearing for a long time. She did not cry. She had not driven 1,100 miles to cry. What she did was take the small notebook from her coat pocket and write down the date and the time in 3 words: the door first. The door was held shut by a hasp and a padlock, and the key Otto had taped to the inside cover of the cabin folder still worked. The hinges complained. The interior smelled of cold wood smoke and dry rodent, and something deeper underneath that she identified after a moment as cedar. She was making her second pass through the single room, taking inventory, when she heard footsteps on the porch. The man at the door was tall, in his late 60s, with a gray beard cut close and the kind of weathered face that came from spending winters outdoors. He was wearing a wool jacket and carrying a canvas pack. He stopped at the threshold when he saw her, and he held up both hands in the open gesture of a person who wanted to make clear he was not a threat. "I'm sorry," he said. "I saw the truck from across the meadow. I wasn't expecting anyone." Sigrid looked at him. "Who are you?" "My name is Matthias Vandenberg," he said. "I have a small place about a mile north on the next parcel. Otto Alvarsen gave me written permission in 1991 to walk this land for biological surveys. I assumed Otto had passed because I have not seen him in some years. I assumed the parcel was in probate. I'm very sorry. You must be Mrs. Alvarsen." "Sigrid," she said. "Sigrid," he said. He set the pack down on the porch outside the door, away from her. "Otto wrote about you. He showed me one of your sedge plates once. The Carex pennsylvanica with the seed detail. That is a very fine drawing." Sigrid had been ready for many things on this porch. She had not been ready for that. She stepped back and gestured him in. He took off his boots first, which she registered as the gesture of a man who had spent enough time in old cabins to know what mud did to a wood floor. Matthias Vandenberg, she learned over the next hour, had retired from the U.S. Forest Service in 2008 after a 30-year career as a wildlife biologist specializing in boreal songbirds. He had built his own small cabin a mile north on a 5-acre inholding he had bought from a logger in 1989. He had known Otto from a regional ecology meeting in 1990 and had corresponded with him for the next 27 years. He had, in fact, walked Clover Fern Hollow every spring and fall since 1992, conducting informal bird counts and noting changes in the white pine stand, and he had a folder of his own with 33 years of data in it. "Otto knew you would come eventually," he said. "He told me that twice." Sigrid sat down on the coal hearth of the wood stove and put her hands flat against the stone. The first night, she slept in the truck. By the second night, Matthias had helped her clear the cabin and start the stove. The smoke rose straight up into a still, cold sky. The first month was repair. Matthias had a friend in Kettle Ridge who owned a sawmill and another friend who installed wood stoves for a living, and within 10 days the leaning stovepipe had been straightened and reflashed. The boarded window had been replaced with new glass, and the soft logs on the west wall had been cut out and sistered with new pine from a tree that had come down in a windstorm 2 winters earlier. Sigrid paid in cash for the materials and in coffee and venison stew for the labor. The exchange suited everyone. She met Ronan and Linnea Eckhart the second week. They were in their early 30s and had moved to Kettle Ridge from Minneapolis 4 years earlier with a plan that involved goats, a small pottery studio, and a determined intention to live below the median income line on purpose. Linnea ran the front of the red pine on weekends. Ronan did finished carpentry for whoever could pay him in something other than promises. He took one look at the cabin's interior, ran his hand along a hand-hewn ceiling beam, and told Sigrid that whoever had cut these logs had known exactly what he was doing. Sigrid told him the man's name had been Halvor Alvarsen, and that he had been her husband's grandfather. Ronan came back the next morning with his tools. By the second week of November, the cabin was tight. The stove drew clean. The propane tank was set and filled. A small bathroom had been roughed in along the back wall using a composting toilet Ronan had built from a kit and a sink that drained into a gravel pit Matthias helped dig. Sigrid had ordered a satellite internet system that arrived by mail and a small solar setup that ran a single line of LED lights, a charging station for her phone and laptop, and a modem. By the end of November, the snow came. It came the way snow comes in that country, 3 feet over a long weekend, and Sigrid sat at the small table by the window watching it fall in the way of a person who had spent 60 years being told that weather was an inconvenience and was suddenly free to find it astonishing. She set up her studio in the corner of the main room, north light through the new window, the flat file underneath a cot she used as a daybed during the day. She unpacked the watercolor pans. She opened Otto's first field journal and read his handwriting for the first time in 9 years. The journals were dated 1959 to 2016. They covered every walk Otto had ever taken at Clover Fern Hollow. They described the white pine stand, the spring seep on the north slope, the fern colonies that had given the property its name, the breeding warblers, the mammal sign, the slow reclamation of an old skid trail by hemlock seedlings between 1972 and 1998. He had been keeping a baseline ecological record of his own family's land for 57 years, and he had never told her, because he had not thought of it as a project. He had thought of it as paying attention. Sigrid sat with the journals at the small table for a long time. Then she opened a fresh sketchbook and began the first plate. By Christmas, she had finished 6. Cardamine concatta, the cut-leaved toothwort, drawn from a pressed specimen of Otto's dated April 1981. Metellodiphylla, Trillium grandiflorum, Myanthemum canadense, Aralia nudicalis, Polygonatum pubescens. Each plate had Otto's field notes transcribed in her hand along the bottom margin in a small, careful italic. She was not making a book. She was making a record. The distinction, she found, was important. Dr. Bhattacharya called for the first telehealth check-in in mid-December. Sigrid sat at the small table with the laptop open and Matthias's borrowed satellite signal holding steady, and Priya went through her numbers. Your blood pressure is the lowest it has been in 8 years, Priya said. I am walking 5 miles a day in deep snow, Sigrid said. It is not optional. The woodpile is 200 feet from the cabin. You have lost 4 pounds. I am eating venison and root vegetables and bread that Linnea Eckhart makes from her own sourdough. Your resting heart rate is 58. I'm sleeping 9 hours. Priya put down her pen. Sigrid, I have been your doctor for 16 years. I have never seen numbers like this in a patient your age in my entire career. What is happening up there? Sigrid thought about how to answer. The honest answer was that she had stopped spending energy managing other people's anxieties about her, and the energy that had been doing that work was now available for her body. She did not say that. What she said was, I am where I am supposed to be. The body knows. Priya reduced one of her 2 blood pressure medications by half. In January, Cordelia Hartwell flew into Marquette, and Matthias drove down with Sigrid to pick her up. Cordelia walked into the cabin, looked at the stove and the studio and the new window and the 6 finished plates pinned to the back wall, and said, You absolute woman. They spent 10 days together. Cordelia helped Sigrid finish the 7th plate, asked precise questions about everything, and on the last night, sitting by the wood stove with whiskey in tin cups, said the things Sigrid had been circling for 2 months. This isn't just a cabin, Cordelia said. This is a small institution. You are building a small institution. You should know that you are doing it. Sigrid looked at the plates on the wall. She looked at Otto's journals stacked on the table. She looked at the window where the snow was coming down again under the porch light. I think, she said, that I might be. By March, the idea had a name. The name was the Clover Fern Field Station. Sigrid wrote it on the inside cover of a fresh notebook in the 3rd week of March, the day the first sapsucker came back to the maple at the edge of the clearing. The station would be small, a working ecological record of one 60-acre parcel, kept by a botanical illustrator and a retired wildlife biologist, available to any older adult who wanted to come and learn how to look at woods properly. 2 visiting beds at a time. Spring through fall sessions of 2 weeks each. No fee for the first 3 years. She drafted the founding document on the laptop with Matthias reading over her shoulder. Esperanza Quintanilla, by phone from Montclair, helped her structure it as a small nonprofit with a working board. Sigrid named herself director. She named Matthias chief field naturalist. She left 2 board seats open and 1 for Cordelia. In April, she sent a single email to Soren. Subject line, I would like to tell you what I am doing. She attached the founding document and a photograph of the 7 plates pinned to the back wall. Soren wrote back in 20 minutes. His message was 3 sentences. Mom, I have read every word. I am flying to Marquette next Friday. He came on the Friday. He stayed 4 days. He walked the property with Matthias, sat at the small table going through Otto's journals, looked at the studio, asked Sigrid one quiet question over dinner the second night. Did you know what you were going to build when you left? He said. Or did the land tell you afterward? The land told me, Sigrid said. I just made the room for it to. Soren nodded and did not speak for a while. Then he said, Marc is going to come up here. He has been calling Esperanza's office. He found out about the field station. He is angry, and he is also scared, and I think he's going to come up here and try to stop you. I know, Sigrid said. Let him. Marc came in June. He flew into Marquette and rented a Jeep at the airport and drove the 4 hours to Kettle Ridge with the GPS guiding him to within a mile of the property before the satellite signal gave up and the last gravel road took him the rest of the way on instinct. He arrived at the clearing at 4 in the afternoon on a Wednesday in mid-June, when the air was full of pollen and the warblers were singing through the canopy, and Sigrid was on the porch with a pencil in her hand finishing the underdrawing for plate number 19. She heard the Jeep before she saw it. She set down the pencil. She did not stand up. Marc got out of the Jeep wearing a button-down shirt and city shoes. He had lost weight since October. His face had the particular exhaustion of a man who had been managing a situation for 8 months that had not gone the way he planned, and when he saw his mother on the porch of a hand-built cabin under a roof his great-grandfather's logs were holding up, he stopped halfway across the clearing the way a person stops when their legs forget what they are for. Mom, he said. Hello, Marc, Sigrid said. There's coffee on the stove. Come inside. Take your shoes off at the door. He took his shoes off at the door. She poured him a cup. She sat him at the small table. She let him talk, because letting people say what they needed to say was the most efficient route to a conversation that could go somewhere. And she had used the 8 months at Cloverfern Hollow to remember how patient she actually was. He said the things she had expected, that he had been worried, that the situation was not what she thought it was, that Stonewell Pines had been a real plan made out of real care, and she had embarrassed the family by leaving the way she had, that the field station idea was a fantasy a woman of her age could not sustain, that the rental income from the house was being mishandled, that the deed on the land was almost certainly contestable. She let him finish. Then she opened the leather portfolio that had been sitting on the table since April. She set the deed in front of him. She set the property management quarterly report in front of him. She set Esperanza Quintanilla's letter confirming the foundation's legal structure in front of him. She set Dr. Bhattacharya's most recent telehealth note with its summary of her current health markers in front of him. She set the founding document for the Cloverfern Field Station in front of him. She did not set Otto's journals in front of him. Those were not part of this conversation. Marc looked at the documents for a long time. He picked up the founding document. He read the first page. He read the second page. He set it down. I didn't know you were like this, he said. Sigrid considered this. She had heard a version of this sentence from her son once before, when he was 11, and she had taught him to identify warblers by song on a trip to Cape May, and he had said, I didn't know you knew this stuff. The sentence had bothered her at the time. It bothered her again now, and for the same reason. I have always been like this, Marc, she said. You weren't looking. He sat with that. He looked out the window. The sapsucker was on the maple. A black-throated green warbler was singing from somewhere in the hemlocks behind the cabin. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle between his hands. Can I see the white pines, he said. She walked him up the slope. She showed him a stand his great-great-grandfather had let stand in 1903 because Halvor Alvarsen had decided that some trees were not for cutting. Marc stood under them and did not speak for a long time. Marc stayed 4 days. He helped Matthias clear a fallen birch from the North Trail. He sat in the studio one evening while Sigrid worked, and he asked questions about her plates that nobody in his family had asked her in 50 years. On the third night, around the fire pit Ronan had built behind the cabin, Marc told his mother that he had been afraid since he was 12 years old that he was not going to amount to what his father had quietly expected of him, and that he had spent 30 years trying to outrun the feeling by accumulating things that would prove him wrong, and that the feeling had only gotten louder. Sigrid listened. She did not fix it. Some things a son needs to say to his mother in front of a fire in a clearing in the woods are not problems to be solved. They are sentences that need a witness. When he flew back to New Jersey on the 5th day, he asked if he could be on the board of the field station. Yes, Sigrid said, on one condition. You serve because you believe in it, not because you want to manage me. Understood, Marc said. The Cloverfern Field Station opened to its first 2 visitors on the 2nd Saturday of September. Sigrid was 90 years old by then, her birthday having come and gone in June without ceremony except for a chocolate cake Linnea brought in a tin and ate with her at the kitchen table. The visitors were a retired high school biology teacher from Duluth named Greta Moberg and a former hospice nurse from Green Bay named Adele Whitford, both in their 70s, both responding to a small notice Cordelia had placed in the newsletter of a regional naturalist society in February. They stayed 2 weeks. Matthias led morning bird walks. Sigrid taught afternoon sessions on field illustration in the studio. Linnea cooked. Ronan rebuilt the porch railing. By the end of the first week, Greta was producing recognizable sketches of the spring beauties along the Seep Trail, and Adele had identified 23 species of bird by song. And both women were sleeping 9 hours a night and laughing more than they had laughed in years. Phoebe came in October. She arrived without warning, drove the gravel road in a rented sedan she should not have driven on that surface, and walked into the clearing in expensive boots that were going to be ruined inside the hour. She did not say anything when she saw the cabin. She did not say anything when Sigrid hugged her. She sat at the small table for a long time while Sigrid made tea, and finally she said, Marc came back different. He won't tell me what happened. Some of it was the trees, Sigrid said. Some of it was his own. Phoebe stayed 3 days. She did not get on a board. She did not apologize for the campaign, because some apologies cannot be made out loud and have to be made some other way over a longer span of time. But before she left, she asked her mother if she could come back in the spring, and Sigrid said yes. Soren came at Thanksgiving with Dahlia. They cooked a wild turkey Matthias had hunted on the Ottawa National Forest the week before. The 4 of them ate at the small table with Cordelia on speakerphone from Asheville, and Sigrid looked at the room and thought, this is what 8 months produced. By the next September, the field station had hosted 14 visitors. 3 of them had gone home and started their own small projects of attention to the land they already lived on. One had begun a similar field record of a 30-acre parcel her grandmother had left her in eastern Tennessee. A small piece in a regional natural history magazine led to a longer one in a national outlet, and the Cloverfern plates began appearing in places Sigrid had not pursued. The Vermont press she had worked with for 40 years offered to publish a book of the plates with Otto's transcribed journal entries running alongside. She accepted on the condition that the book's proceeds went to the field station. She sat at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening in October of her 91st year with a cup of tea and a stack of finished plates beside her and the wood stove making the sound it made when the night was going to be cold. She opened the small notebook she had carried since the first day, the one in which she had written the door first with the cabin still padlocked behind her, and she wrote a final entry. 89 was not the end of anything. 89 was the year I stopped letting other people tell me what 89 was supposed to look like. Otto knew about this place for 56 years and waited for me to be ready to see it. The land was patient. I was patient with myself once I stopped listening to people who were not. I have everything I need. I have more than I ever asked for. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and I intend to stay here for as long as the body will let me. She closed the notebook. She put her hand flat on its cover for a moment. Then she got up and added a log to the stove, and she stood at the window for a while watching the darkness past the porch light, where the white pines her great-grandfather-in-law had spared in 1903 were still standing in the dark, doing what they had been doing for 200 years. If Sigrid's story moved you, hit the like button so this story can reach the people who need it today. And before you go, I want to ask you something. Think about what Sigrid did at 89. Think about the deed she found, the truck she drove, the cabin she rebuilt, the field station she opened. If you had to describe her in just one single word, what would that word be? Strength, freedom, wildness, grit, fire. Leave your word in the comments. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to see what word you choose for Sigrid. A warm embrace to each and every one of you. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.